How exactly do you build a global superpower from scratch? Well, today we're diving into a fast-paced, domino effect journey through thousands of years of American history. We're going to trace the absolute transformation of a massive continent, starting from its ancient indigenous roots all the way up to its status as a modern global superpower. It's a story of, incredible ambition, intense conflict, and just profound transformation. Let's get into it.
To make sense of this massive transformation, we'll be navigating through 5 distinct eras in this explainer: foundations in the Revolution, expansion and deep division, industry and global wars, the Cold War and civil rights, and finally, modern America and beyond.
But before we actually start our timeline, let's zoom out for a second and look at the big picture. Why does all this history actually matter to us right now? Well, the overarching question we're trying to answer is this: how did a loose collection of fledgling colonies actually become a modern, world-shaping superpower? The answer is this fascinating chain reaction of historical events that literally continues to influence the entire globe today. All right, starting with Part 1, Foundations and the Revolution, covering pre-1492 all the way to 1783.
To truly understand America, we've got to recognize that its story definitely didn't just suddenly begin in 1492. Long before European ships ever crossed the Atlantic, millions of indigenous people were already thriving here. Actually, to put that into perspective, ancient native cities like Cahokia in the Mississippian region, they were once larger than London. We're talking about advanced societies here, from the Pueblo in the southwest to the Iroquois and the Plains tribes who built cities, farmed, and kept complex spiritual traditions. But then, the arrival of Christopher Columbus sparked a massive wave of European colonization: Spain, France, the Netherlands, and of course England. The English established their first permanent settlement at Jamestown in 1607, and by 1620 the Pilgrims arrived on the Mayflower. Ultimately, this collision of worlds led to the formation of 13 distinct English colonies right along the Atlantic coast.
Now, as those 13 colonies grew, they started developing their own local governments and really bustling economies. But severe tension quickly built up with Britain. The colonists were, they were intensely frustrated by British control over their trade and these exceptionally high taxes imposed on them from all the way across the ocean. I mean, just think about the sheer audacity of this for a second. A handful of fragile colonies deciding to stand up to the world's greatest naval empire. With absolutely zero political power or voice in the British Parliament, their outrage was captured perfectly by that famous, fiery slogan you've probably heard: "No taxation without representation."
In those protests, they quickly boiled over into the ultimate underdog story. By 1775, the battles of Lexington and Concord ignited an all-out revolution. Just a year later, on July 4, 1776, the colonies adopted the Declaration of Independence, which was drafted primarily by Thomas Jefferson. And against all odds, like literally against all odds, in 1783, led by the military strategy of George Washington, and with some absolutely crucial help from France, the Americans actually defeated Britain. Just like that, a brand new independent nation was born.
Which brings us to Part 2, Expansion and Deep Division, from 1783 to 1865.
So winning independence was monumental, right? But it created a massive, unprecedented problem. How do you actually govern a brand new country completely from scratch? The solution came during the 1787 Constitutional Convention. Rather than just putting all the power back into the hands of a king, which is what they just fought against, the framers created this brilliant system of separation of powers across 3 distinct branches of government: the President, Congress, and the Supreme Court. George Washington became the very first president in 1789, and shortly after that, a Bill of Rights was added to guarantee fundamental freedoms like speech, religion, and a fair trial.
With a stable government finally in place, the young nation started looking west. In 1803, President Thomas Jefferson bought a massive stretch of territory from France known as the Louisiana Purchase. Amazingly, he doubled the size of the entire country for just about 3 cents an acre. Crazy, right? This fueled a powerful 19th century ideology known as manifest destiny. Millions of Americans truly believed it was their divinely ordained destiny to expand across the entire continent. And this relentless westward push fueled historic events, like the California Gold Rush, but it also caused deep, devastating conflicts with Native American tribes, Mexico, and European powers.
But as the map of America expanded, unfortunately, so did its internal fractures. Westward expansion relentlessly exacerbated the darkest chapter in American history, which was slavery. Millions of Africans had been brought to America and forced to work primarily on southern plantations. As new territories were absorbed into the nation, a really deep, bitter ideological split emerged. The northern states were increasingly turning against the institution of slavery, while the southern states heavily relied on this forced labor and staunchly defended it. The fracture became inevitable. When Abraham Lincoln, who opposed the expansion of slavery, was elected president in 1860, southern states actually seceded from the Union entirely to form the Confederacy.
This division violently erupted into the American Civil War in 1861. It was a brutal, bloody conflict between the Union and the Confederacy. Midway through the fighting in 1863, President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which firmly shifted the focus of the entire war toward ending slavery. Finally, in 1865, the Union achieved victory, fundamentally preserving the nation and changing its trajectory forever. But, that ultimate victory was immediately followed by profound loss. Tragically, President Lincoln was assassinated just days after the war's end.
So, the crucial point in all of this comes right down to one monumental legislative act, the 13th Amendment. Ratified right after the conclusion of the Civil War, this addition to the United States Constitution officially and legally abolished the horrifying institution of slavery across the entire nation.
Moving right along to Part 3, Industry and Global Wars, covering 1865 to 1945.
The end of the Civil War acted like a massive historical domino, propelling a newly unified America into an era of explosive, rapid industrialization. On the innovation side, brilliant minds like Thomas Edison, Alexander Graham Bell, and Nikola Tesla were completely transforming society. Giant corporations seemingly emerged out of nowhere in steel, oil, and banking. But there was a stark human cost to all this. This boom relied heavily on millions of new immigrants arriving from Europe, Asia, and Latin America. And while tremendous wealth was being generated at the very top, everyday workers often faced horrific conditions, severely low wages, and even child labor, which eventually forced the creation of labor unions to fight for basic human rights.
But this booming America was about to experience some severe global whiplash. In just 3 decades, the nation was pulled into the battlefields of Europe, entering World War I in 1917 and helping defeat Germany. Then, a massive domestic crisis hit in 1929 when the stock market collapsed, plunging the nation into the sheer devastation of the Great Depression, which then prompted FDR's New Deal to try and rebuild the economy. Yet recovery was interrupted. In 1941, the attack on Pearl Harbor dragged America directly into a second, far more expansive global conflict, World War II.
During World War II, America fought a staggering multi-front war against Germany, Italy, and Japan, participating in massive turning points like the D-Day invasion. The fighting ultimately culminated in 1945 when the U.S. unleashed the devastating power of the newly developed atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, leading to Japan's surrender. When the dust of World War II finally settled, the global dynamic had completely shifted. Through its immense industrial output and newly demonstrated military might, the United States emerged from the ashes as an undisputed global superpower. Let's look at what happened next in Part 4, Cold War and Civil Rights, 1945 to 1991. The end of World War II immediately birthed 2 massive, simultaneous struggles, one global and one domestic. On the global stage, we entered the Cold War. This was a really tense, decades-long rivalry between the world's 2 new superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. Rather than engaging in direct, all-out warfare, the 2 nations engaged in a terrifying, high-stakes nuclear arms race. They navigated incredibly close calls like the Cuban Missile Crisis and fought devastating proxy wars in places like Korea and Vietnam. And this brilliantly illustrates a really strange paradox. The intense paranoia and competition of the Cold War actually fueled incredible human achievements. The military rivalry birthed the space race, a fierce push for technological dominance that culminated in 1969 during the Apollo 11 mission. That year, astronaut Neil Armstrong took his historic first step on the moon. It's an unbelievable feat, especially when you realize they accomplished it using computers that had less processing power than the smartphone sitting in your pocket today. But while America was projecting dominance all the way out into the stars, it was facing deep, unresolved injustices right back home. African Americans, despite the end of slavery a full century prior, still faced brutal racial discrimination and segregation. This urgent domestic fight for equality sparked the civil rights movement. Courageous leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and Rosa Parks fought tirelessly, pushing the government to pass landmark legislation, like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which fundamentally transformed American society for the better.
And that brings us to our final era, Part 5, Modern America and Beyond, from 1991 to the present.
In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, bringing the Cold War to an end. The United States was left as the sole, undisputed global superpower navigating a rapidly accelerating modern world. And as that sole superpower, America heavily dictated the dawn of the digital age. U.S. leadership in the internet, personal computing, and now artificial intelligence has completely changed how the entire planet communicates and works. Companies like Apple, Microsoft, and Google became global titans, while advancements in space exploration just continued to push the boundaries of what's actually possible.
However, the modern era has also been marked by profound tragedy and conflict. On the morning of September 11, 2001, terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon violently altered the American trajectory. This singular, devastating day deeply impacted the nation's psyche and immediately initiated decades of conflict and war in the Middle East, specifically in Afghanistan and Iraq.
As you can see, the American story proves that rapid, unimaginable transformation is entirely possible. But as modern America faces deeply complex new challenges today, from deepening political division and economic inequality to the existential threat of climate change, the question isn't just how this superpower will adapt. The real question is, how will its next chapter echo across the rest of the globe? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep asking the big questions.